Hey everyone, welcome back to Logtech Live. It's November 17th. This is our last show before Thanksgiving. The holidays are starting to kick in. So yeah, very kind of scatterbrain time of year, right? Everybody's taking some time off. So I'm glad all of you can join us today. We have a fantastic show, a great guest as usual, someone who I've been wanting to have on for a while after we met earlier this year, and I'm really glad we were able to make it work today. So if this is your first episode of Logtech Live, welcome. You picked a great one. If you're a regular viewer, really appreciate your support. As I always say, I only do this for you. I would not do this if no one was watching. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. So a couple things to mention right off the bat. I'm kind of past most of my travel now. I think I brought some souvenir back from one of my trips. I have like this nasty hacking cough right now, so apologies if that starts to pop up. But we are now starting to get into the home stretch for TPM, which will be March 3rd through 6th in Long Beach, California, as usual. First week in what is it, March. So we're almost 100 days out. By the next show at the beginning of December will be less than 100 days till the conference. So now we start to get a little freaked out and anxious about whether we have all our ducks in a row. But in the meantime, you can use the code that's flashing on the banner, and that will also be in the comments to register at joc.com to attend. You get 25% off a pass. So I believe the registration link will also be in the comments. So super excited about that. Definitely check out the agenda. We're building that week by week. It's really coming together. TPM Tech is, as I've mentioned before, now part of TPM this year. So it's going to be really fun to have everybody be on site and have like normal TPM attendees also have access to TPM Tech sessions. So we have some cool stuff cooked up for you guys this year. And it's going to be bigger and better. Last show I missed. Thank you so much to Angela Chakowski at Hartman Advisors and Luke, our guest from Green Sea. Had a great discussion. I was literally in the air somewhere over the Atlantic when that episode was happening because I was at the IAP Ports conference in Abu Dhabi, which was an awesome event focused on a lot of the stuff that I care about, digital kind of aptitude of ports globally, especially in developing nations, how the port industry is going to cope with decarbonization mandates, and just a lot about kind of collaboration between ports and within port ecosystems. So super interesting conference. I met so many fascinating people from all parts of the world. There were lots of ports from Africa and LATAM and Southeast Asia and Europe, and really cool to get like different viewpoints than we get when I'm sitting here in North America or Europe and kind of going to the big ports that we report on a lot. One last thing, you've heard me mention this a number of times. It's sort of the tail end of conference season, but it will soon be the spring conference season. Please support the Blended Pledge. Sarah and Let's Talk Supply Chain do this awesome initiative where they help support people to go and attend events and speak at events and sort of represent the actual diversity in the industry rather than just a bunch of people that look like me being on stage in mantle after mantle. So please support that. It funds people who don't have the travel budget to actually go and be representative at our events. Not just our events, our industry's events, I should say. So let me quickly get into news of the week. Demand is down. There's too much capacity in almost every mode. Rates are way down. It's we're all kind of worried about whether there's going to be a recession or whether we're in a recession. But man, the news just does not stop, which is great if you're in the news business. Wanted to highlight this piece that went up, I believe, earlier this week from my colleague Greg Noller, talking about a very important issue, which is decarbonization mandates are putting a pressure on ocean carriers to pay a cost to use greener fuel, and if they don't use greener fuel, they have to pay for carbon offsets. Those carbon offsets cost money, and the theory is carriers need to pass those costs on to shippers. Well, we've talked to shippers, and shippers are just not really willing to incur those costs right now with the market where it is. Freight rates are super low. Shippers do not want a line item that says pay this much more on top of whatever their base rate is, because they're in a position to kind of dictate to a certain extent what they want to pay. So that, for me, the interesting thing is how much are green initiatives, the pass through on those costs, going to be all the way down to the shipper level in a market that favors them versus a market that doesn't favor them. And it will switch. The market always switches, right? Remember 2 years ago, it was carrier heaven. We're now in a position where carriers are struggling to get rates above cost. So I think in order for these green initiatives to really take root, we're going to somehow have to decouple that, right? It can't be contingent on whoever has the power in the market in any given moment, because decarbonization mandates don't care what the supply demand balance is. So next story, another piece of news that our team broke in the last couple of weeks since our last show. The ILA, which is the Longshore Union on the U.S. East Coast, our reporter Michael Angel was at their conference last week in Nashville, and they have essentially said they are going to drive a hard bargain on their contract, just like their peers in the ILWU did on the West Coast. And they want a contract that looks at least as good as that contract was. Now, again, for shippers and all the parties that cater to them, what this means is this is going into next year. You now have another year of potential uncertainty about an entire coast and their ports, just like we had on the West Coast. And what we saw in the West Coast was a lot of volume migrated to the East Coast, some of it permanently, some of it not permanently, but it did have an effect. That uncertainty built, and shippers started saying, I don't want to deal with some sort of long-term issue at a key West Coast port that I use. I'm just going to start to move more volume through an East Coast port. And we've already started to see that switch back. So volume is moving back to the West Coast for stuff where it makes sense to go through the West Coast. And related to the previous story, you have the Panama Canal, right? Like there's a drought at the canal. There's going to be restricted transits through it. That's going to have an impact. So the West Coast is in a position to recapture some of what it lost, and the East Coast is going to be driving a hard bargain. So basically, the long and the short of it is, yes, rates are coming down, but the uncertainty for shippers does not seem to stop. So keep an eye on that. We'll be reporting on that really closely, as we usually do. So last piece I wanted to highlight was from my colleague, Ari Ash. He puts out a really cool index called the Intermodal Savings Index. He's been doing this for a few years. I wanted to highlight this. And in the comments, you can click the link to the story and find out more about the index itself. The story to me is less interesting than what Ari is doing. He's essentially doing a whole bunch of data crunching with partner providers that are giving him pricing data on an anonymous basis and figuring out whether it makes sense in any given moment for a shipper to move volume via truckload or intermodal. And that interplay between those two is really a huge indicator of where the strength in the market is. So definitely encourage you, if you've not looked at this index before, to check it out and see if it's valuable. It's certainly valuable for a lot of shippers, especially ones who are moving not just port to port, obviously, which no shipper does. No one unloads their cargo at the port and leaves it there, right? So you have an inland move. If you're considering intermodal versus truckload, this is a really cool index to help you kind of map out your next quarter. Okay, enough shameless plug of my colleague's work. Really delighted to introduce my guest and bring him on, Chris Schetter, who's VP of Product at a company called CargoSense. Chris, so glad you could join us today. Thanks so much for making the time this morning.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Cool. So we are very close. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. You're out in Reston, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So not too far for people who are not familiar with the Nova area. But before you tell us a little bit about CargoSense, what is your background? What did you do before CargoSense? What brought you to the company?
So I'm a technologist as career. I spent roughly a decade as an engineer writing code for various places. I've been all over the place around here. As an individual contributor, and then I sort of made a switch into being more of a full-time product manager. I guess 8 or so years ago, and I've done stuff mostly in the B2B space since. A short stint in like ad tech. I was working in the esports scene for a while. So I've been all over the place, and I kind of ended up here working in supply chain tech, but kind of a chance reconnection with our founder and CEO at a Starbucks down the street. I'd worked with him previously at Living Social, and kind of
That
lost
was
touch
like
a
the
little bit.
Groupon. That was kind of like a Groupon
Yeah,
type.
that's
Yeah,
right.
that's right. Yeah.
Groupon competitor that was
Yep.
based here in DC.
Yep.
We can talk about that if you want, because that's a fun story. But yeah, kind of what wasn't didn't necessarily seek out supply chain logistics tech. It kind of found me, and so we got to talking about what he was doing. I found it really interesting, really compelling, and here I am almost 5 years later, still working on it. So
It's obviously been compelling enough for you to stay. I think this is like a common story, right? People never necessarily thought about it. There's an opportunity, and then it's like it hooks you for whatever reason, like the complexity, the puzzle nature of it, the international nature of it, one interesting thing I forgot about the Living Social connection. So there's a connection between Groupon and the logistics business as well, because Groupon was spun out of, I forget if Groupon was spun out of Echo, the freight broker, or if Echo was spun out of Groupon. It's one of those two. They shared a building for a while.
Yep.
If they might still, I don't know, but so interesting. So, and sorry, apologies for the cough. It's just getting steadily worse these days.
Yeah, you're good. I've been there.
Yeah, I think everybody. I was at an event earlier this week, and everybody had it. They're like, "Oh yeah, you have the cough, the month-long cough, right?" Okay.
Oh, fun. Thanks.
Yeah, so, good. Thanks for letting me know what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, give us a level set on CargoSense. Why was it founded? Who are your customers? What do you do?
Sure. So I'll talk first about kind of like where we are today, right? Because we've been in business for 10 years and that's evolved. So where we are today is we're a software company that focuses on automating supply chain operations. Our mission is to simplify supply chain operations using a combination of measurement, automation, and collaboration. And so we see automation being the thing that really drives those two. You can drive better collaboration with both internally and externally through automation, and really the use of visibility data or measurement of your supply chain is a thing that is the fuel for the automation. So you can improve your outcomes across the board, right, in your operations. How we got there is a long and winding road. CargoSense was founded, again, almost 10 years ago. I think actually more than 10 years ago now, really as an IoT play in supply chain, right? And so we were really focused on figuring out, IoT was kind of the big kind of buzzword of sorts in terms of visibility at that time. And so it started out as experimentations, both on the hardware and software side, as to how to best deploy, cell connected devices, et cetera, into supply chains to improve operations. Over time, we've sort of evolved to rely more on partners for hardware sides of programs, rather than kind of really getting our hands dirty in that side of things, and sticking more to the software side, which given the background of our founder and some of the folks that have been here since the beginning, that's more our bread and butter is as software technologists. So, but Yeah, we've tried a number of things over the years, and the things that have really stuck have been really the things that revolve around automation in operations. So that's our thesis today.
So hardware neutral, taking whatever device a customer has and helping them use that as a fuel to automate. So who are your customers? Are they shippers, 3PLs? Do you work with carriers of in any mode, or what's kind of your target customer?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of all over the place. I think we focus mostly in our outbound marketing around shippers in particular. But we do have 3PL customers. We do work with some air carriers in particular to help them monitor various aspects of their operation. So yeah, it's really all over the place. Pharmaceutical companies in particular are a big segment of our current customer base.
And what's the typical like persona that sort of understands your message and has the budget to like actually do something about it?
Yeah, so I think it's supply chain leadership. So VP on up, and really the thing that the worries for that crowd that kind of put them squarely into our ideal customer profile, right, is where they are. It has to do with both the scale of their operations. So they've got problems because of how big their operations are. There's just so much going on, and a combination of that and kind of worries about the labor market in general. I think one thing that we've been hearing over and over in terms of customer leads that do turn into really, really good relationships for us is that they're not necessarily looking to replace headcount with automation. They're not looking to put people out of jobs or like really cut costs in that sense. But they know that the experience of working on their teams is one of a lot of drudgery, a lot of the same thing over and over, a lot of stuff where if you're tech savvy at all, you know that like this can be automated. Like I shouldn't be having to do this, that kind of work. So like a glut of drudgery in your operations that that you can clear out of your way just to make their lives better because you want to keep them on your team. Again, that talent retention thing is something that we're hearing over and over, more and more these days in particular.
Yeah, it's a funny labor market, right? Like there's a chronic shortage of like supply chain talent. Obviously costs have gone up with inflation and the job market the way it was.
Yep.
People want, and then yet people are like, I think, constantly searching for the people in their business who are irreplaceable or who they see a path to like do something more. And then they're thinking, okay, well, what are the areas where we have people, but long-term that's best handled by a system. So yeah, that message is, I would imagine resonates really well with people who are kind of like right on that inflection point of understanding what they need to do headcount wise. I mean, we talked about when we met earlier this year, we talked about this like in the software space, right? Like it became a vanity metric to hire people, right? No, at software companies. And it's like, it's always been strange to me to be like, wait, you're telling a business that you can do more with less if you use our product, but you keep hiring more people. So you're not doing more with less, right? So
what's the game here? Right?
It's a mixed message. So
yeah, and I'm no macroeconomist or anything, right? Like economist, sorry. So the sort of factors that led us to this point, that are out of my depth, right? But I think
mine too, by the way.
Right?
I don't even play one on TV. I'm like, I have more sense than that.
Yeah,
so.
But I mean, the one thing that I think we can say for certain is that the dynamics of the pandemic on the labor market has brought this to the fore. Like whatever the mechanics were of that, is that there was this massive shift over that period, and now we're kind of dealing with the consequences of that, which manifests for supply chain leaders in this what we're talking about right here, where it's like, I'm really worried about losing my talent. I don't want them going next door. I don't want to deal with the costs of having to replace them over and over and over again. Like pre-pandemic, this was not really an issue. Post-pandemic, it's a huge issue. And so it's both a kind of a talent retention focus, but also how can I put my operations on kind of sturdier rails on all aspects possible, and automating what you can is a great way to do that.
So it's interesting. You are one of, I would say, like a handful of people that I notice on LinkedIn who say, do not post long posts with images and charts and stuff. You will say something very pointed in 1 or 2 sentences and then hit post and just sit back
and walk
it's
away.
an interesting
Go have lunch.
Yeah, it's an interesting strategy because there's a couple other people who I feel do something similar, and I don't think you guys took a class or coordinated on it, but I think it's really effective. And I think one of the things you talk about a lot is just like being mindful for the market, being mindful of what's being sort of overpromised or mismarketed.
Sure.
What can you, beyond like a one sentence kind of, hey, you may want to look at this. What do you think are sort of the major problems along those lines? What is being kind of overpromised?
Well, I think just the return on investment. I think there is a disconnect between what's being said about the problems and then the cures and then reality. Once you get into, let's just get beyond like the sales cycle, like actual deployed, we've got this in motion as far as it can be taken. Yeah. What are we getting out of it? I think that like the things that come to mind immediately around this. So there was the PwC supply chain sort of survey that's the word I was looking for. Survey that they put out every year, and this year. One of the headlines there, if I remember correctly, was like 83% of respondents had technology projects that they think did not, meet the return on investment. And that's just like, that's a huge issue. And, around visibility in particular, I'm reminded of another study where I think it was something like 3/4 of respondents thought that real-time visibility was like a must-have in terms of their responses, but then when asked, do you actually use it? It was something far less than that. And there's this gap between, what I meant to say was, there's this disconnect. The marketing teams are doing their job. They are coming with a message that's resonating, and they are creating the demand. And then the products on the other side aren't actually poised to meet that demand and solve the problem. And I think that when you get into how are we actually going to utilize visibility data, oftentimes the end result of that is dot on a map, a statistic that gets shoved into a TMS or an ERP somewhere, something that's passively consumed, and that basically your team has to actually look at that thing, contextualize it themselves in order to get any utility out of it. And our perspective is like, that's so much value being left on the table there. And I think that's really what the gap there in those surveys. I know the first one was like supply chain in general, so it's a broader category than just visibility, but I think it speaks the same problem.
Let's not ignore the big issue too, which is there was a lot of pressure on companies to grow while the market was apparently hot. I mean, it was hot. And that, I think, I'm not trying to give companies a pass for sort of over marketing or over promising relative to what they were able to deliver, but that was part of the bargain in terms of taking on a lot of money. They had to drive growth, and that sort of feeds into a pretty heavy marketing campaign. So so the visibility market, which I know is sort of feeds into what you guys are doing. It's not like the core of what you do. It's kind of in an interesting place right now. Obviously, the desperation during the pandemic has receded. I've talked about that on the show a bunch, and now we're sort of rationalizing into I would say, a more normal kind of buying cycle, of which tends to be long. And but on the flip side, there hasn't really been any consolidation in the market since, I want to say, 21, right? So how do you sort of think that shakes out, and what does it matter what's happening in that market in terms of what you guys are doing?
I'll take the last part of that question first, I guess. Not so much. I think we're in a place where you know uh, various visibility providers can provide us raw material for what we're doing. And so we talked a lot about devices earlier as foundational, at least early on in the company, right? It's less so now. We can take visibility data of any flavor. It's really coming from, for us, it's coming from the other side of it. It's like, what are you trying to automate? And then let's figure out what data we need to bring to that, instead of trying to say, like, let's go buy some visibility data and see what we can smash with it. And so, from that perspective, whatever unwinding is yet to come in the space, we're kind of, we're insulated from it, I guess is the right way to put it.
Got it.
You probably have more of an insider's view than I do on some of these things, I would say. But in terms of like what's yet to come, and I'm not a very good prognosticator in this sense. But I think what I will say is that you can do some back of the envelope math on the sort of top level dynamics of some of the largest players in this space, and you kind of got it there. There's at least another shoe to drop somewhere at some point. And I mean, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, is sort of like the dynamics of a venture fueled market, and sort of there are good things that come out of that, and there are some ugly things that come out of that. And one of those things is that companies in the space, that when you take on venture capital and you take on a lot of growth capital very quickly, it's to sort of put a company in orbit that looks to be this like very healthy, vibrant, going concern, when everybody kind of knows that you're spending $3 to make two for a while, until you reach some sort of scale where the top line revenue matches your expenses. And sometimes that works, oftentimes that doesn't. And there's a lot that goes into managing those sorts of ventures, that you kind of have to work to suspend that reality, or suspend disbelief in that, so that you can attract customers. Because if you're just straight up like, yeah, we've got money to operate for 12 months and then we don't really know, we're going to figure it out as we go, that's not great, especially in this space where like disruptions are unwanted. We want partners for the long haul. And so that's what makes I think building a venture backed company in this space particularly challenging. But it's really like, everything from the outside is going to look great until it's not. And sometimes that's like true. Sometimes it's a really spectacular implosion. Sometimes it's just like a massive layoff, and then you go, oh, okay. Yeah. Gravity.
Sometimes it's death by 1,000 cuts too, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and you don't, And I think one thing that and I'm probably guilty of this as anybody, we lost sight a bit during the pandemic of like, businesses fail more often than they succeed. And that's not just a VC phenomenon. That's every type of business, right? So it's not that there was a divine right for every company that raised a ton of money to eventually get to where they wanted to go. And in fact, the numbers suggest it's far more likely that they will not. So we're starting to learn that lesson, I think. Relearn it, I should say.
It's all fun and games until the Fed funds rate is not 0 to 0.25%, right? Like that's kind of the lesson here is we had a pendulum swing way out where The cost of capital was really low, and a lot of things were able to get capitalized to a point where, like, in sort of normal conditions, it looks absurd, but it was still happening. So you're just like, well, we got to kind of go with it. And um, now the pendulum's swinging back, and so
Just don't get hit by the pendulum. That's the message, right? Just
basically,
survive.
right. And
Yeah.
so you were kind of in that time, you kind of looked silly if you weren't raising a bunch of money, but like in the sense of but if you had a plan to not walk that path, the plan that you had to put in place was like, okay, how are we going to get through this period, still getting our message out there, still being able to modestly grow our company, and stay in the game until things sort of work themselves out. And that's kind of the path that we ended up having to walk.
Well, so I did want to I wanted to ask a question. I sort of consider you guys, for lack of a better term, and maybe this is not what you want to be designated at, but as a quiet company, right? Like, you don't make a lot of noise in the market. I honestly sort of only came across you because of your account, and after that started to take notice a little bit more of what you're doing. Was that a conscious decision to sort of take that path? Is that aligned with kind of how what funding you use to grow the company versus like venture? Or is that how do you sort of explain that?
In a sense, in a way. I mean, I don't think it's like necessarily entirely deliberate, but I think we've had success kind of not doing a whole lot of traditional kind of SaaS outbound marketing activities, and really focus on trying to find getting key relationships, and then
word of mouth and channel partnerships,
delivering value, and then they help us, they expose us to more partners, and just kind of growing from there, more direct and in the background. And that's worked out pretty well for us. It's starting to, I mean, the other side of that coin is like, we just flatly don't have the budget to go out and to try to go,
shock and
blow
awe
for blow on marketing narrative against, companies that have, a larger, vastly larger war chest than we do. So we just kind of don't play that game. Right.
Yep. All right. Well, we're now 20 some odd minutes into our conversation. The core of what I wanted to get to is something you've written about a lot, and we talked about a lot when we met earlier this year, which is kind of pivoting or migrating is probably a better word, a company's view of managing supply chain from just having data, like you said, sort of that passive approach to it, toward actioning it. It's not something that I haven't heard before, but I think you did a good job of sort of like explaining that sort of transformation. Can you explain what you mean, what you mean, or what I mean when I'm saying actions versus just sort of like eyeballing data?
Yeah, I'll try. I think it collides again with some stuff I mentioned earlier, so I may repeat myself, I think, but that's okay. I think that our general thesis, right, is one of trying to clear out the drudgery in operating a supply chain, and then on the other side of that coin, reaching into stuff that is just impractical or impossible to do manually. And this is not necessarily like I'm still running my supply chain on Excel problem. There are large supply chains that are running on, notable systems of record that they're using to manage things that aren't spreadsheets, and they still have problems of my team is bogged down in all of this menial stuff on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis just to keep the whole thing going. And that, I think, that's the place where you can apply visibility data and actually extract all of the value from it, is taking that information and letting it do that work. And the only way to do that is through automation in our view. I don't really see how any other way to put it, right? And so that's what our platform is designed to help do. Our approach in this is consultative versus just a straight up SaaS play where you just log in and you do all the things. And we take that approach because for a couple reasons. One is that things are just generally too complex. And again, it's not a problem of just like, I've got data over here and I need it over there. That's a step in the right direction, but it's like when you consider why it is that the data is trapped over here, it's needed over there. What is the process that you're managing? And then once you say, okay, how much of this process can we actually automate? How much can we get it off of the plates of both sides of this equation? So that it isn't just like, I'm waiting to see this in this portal, I'm waiting to see it in that portal. I think what it takes me to thought. Well, I think one thing that you were probably had in mind when you pass these notes over is my favorite punching bag around the marketing around all this stuff is a single pane of glass. That's like
I forgot to mention that specifically.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was saying that or describing their product as that for a long time, and we do not describe our product as a single pane of glass. Like our aim is 0 panes of glass. I think this is probably the best way I can describe this whole thing in one metaphor is like, get the work out of the way. That needs to be the point. It's not, okay, my team's in 4 different portals and I'd like them to have one. It's because if they're doing the same amount of work, if it's the same amount of touches is kind of the way I like to put it, whatever those look like, if it's the same amount of cognitive load on that team to keep everything going, then them not having a context switch between a bunch of different tools is a benefit, but really, in my view, that's a very marginal benefit. Really, it's
incremental rather than
it's not transformational, right? And so the aim with solutions that we deploy are, let's get some transformational gains by letting visibility data combined with all the context of your system records. If we as much sort of objective analysis and driving of the management of the processes that you have to manage to keep your supply chain running, let's do that. And that's where the transformational gains come from.
So earlier this year at one of our conferences, there was a guy named John Motley, who's longtime CEO of this company called Logtech, and we were talking about AI, and I'm going to bend his phrase that he said to what you said, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about AI and automation and that they're not interchangeable. But he said, we were talking about AI and he said, the best AI is no UI. And I'm hearing you say something similar along the lines of automation is like, forget about something that's easier for them to use. They shouldn't have anything to use at all, right? So that's super interesting. Not a question, just wanted to highlight that I think there's a select few people who are thinking along those lines.
No, I dig it.
In our space. So I wanted to get into, because your job is, and correct me if I'm wrong, your job is to like develop the product so that the customer, it's not just useful to the customer, but is sellable and understandable for them to know what they're getting into. And once they're in it, what else needs to be added? Do you think it's a super noisy industry right now? There are no shortages of companies. There's no shortages of sales reps in the market pushing their solution as the best thing ever. Do you think there's a bit of a communication breakdown in terms of conveying value prop to the industry, whether you're targeting a shipper or forwarder or some other entity?
That's a good question. I think that let me see if this thought helps answer that. I think that it takes me into the conversation that's been happening a little bit that I've been seeing around like point solutions versus kind of all-in-one platforms.
Yep.
This is just where your question took me, which is like, from the standpoint of, I think there are a lot of great point solutions out there, and I think that's a great thing. I think we've got some of the larger players kind of overtly saying that the era of point solutions is over. Like our all-in-one platforms can serve all your needs. There's no point to go do a mix and match and build your own stack. And like I think that the challenge that you have in building a point solution is like, you want to build something great. You've got a small team. You really do have to make this choice of like, we've got to find our niche and really nail it. And the problem is that when you're marketing and you're trying to attract customers for that, oftentimes, again, there's this gap between where your solution ends and how it can be actually applied to a customer's operations. And so oftentimes, right, the answer to that is just like, okay, we've got, one API integration and we're going to take data from our thing and we're going to shove it in another thing. It's this like moving beyond the blue dot problem, is like, how do you actually solve that? We see us as being, helping fill that gap, because no two companies, again, this is like the one, if there's one thing that I've learned in being involved in supply chain at this point, it's like no two supply chains are the same.
Unique snowflakes.
It's just, it's not chaos. It's like there's thematic similarities, right? Everybody's got the same stuff to do, but the priorities, how they get it done, it's like a reflection of the core business that those supply chains serve. And so you walk into two companies in the same industry, it's completely different, and they've got different problems, and those are the things that we as a company we're called on to help solve. And so if you've got a great API for whatever, or you got a great product for this, this particular aspect of supply chain, it has to be brought into the mix with other point solutions, with your customer system of record, in the context of the operational processes that are going on, if you're going to build like a very robust relationship with that customer, where they're not going to just, which I think is happening a lot right now, see you as a SaaS vendor and you're aligned on a budget, and it's like, are we getting anything out of this 30K or 50K expenditure a year? And if nobody has a compelling answer for that question, boom, you're gone, you're churned. But if you are able to be a part of solutions that, again, are actually transformational in a supply chain business, or a supply chain operation, you're going to be far more sticky. But you kind of can't do it alone. And so I guess the other angle on this is, a lot of kind of looking down on announcements of partnerships and stuff like that. But like, that's the stuff those are the kind of relationships in the technology space that actually, I think, is going to result in customer relationships that do survive downturns and are very durable.
I was writing a lot about partnerships for a long time, because I felt like it was actually really meaningful in a way that maybe that word wasn't in the past. So it's interesting you bring that up. We're almost out of time, but I have to ask, I ask this of every guest, wrap up the show. Who's your favorite band or musician? And you have to tell me why.
Oh boy. Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is the thing that I ended up thinking about the most all morning.
Of course.
Oh boy. So I think I want to answer this in two parts. I think more recently, I think the answer to that is Fred again for me. It just really creative. Love his use of like real world samples in most every songs and spoken word, and taking that and making compositions out of it. It's really cool. I think all time though, I'm a Radiohead guy, so that's got to be my answer.
No one's actually said that before. That's an interesting
Okay.
one. Yeah, I would have suspected someone would have said, so you're the first. So my 10-year-old, is obsessed with Karma Police right now. So I'm like, okay, keep going down that route. You're on the right track. No Taylor Swift.
Yep.
So,
Right
well, Chris, this has been awesome. Really glad we were finally able to make this work. Thanks so much. How can people reach out? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
You find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. Connect with our founder and CEO, Rich Kilmer, on LinkedIn. Find us CargoSense or CargoSense.com.
Cool. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Great holiday too.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Eric.
Bye. All right, really quick. I got to race against time here because that was a fantastic conversation. So, dad joke of the week time. Let's get that banner up. What does a pirate want from software? ROI. That actually worked because Chris even mentioned ROI earlier in the show. So I did not plan that, I swear. But yeah, there you go. But you can tell that over the Thanksgiving dinner table and make everybody's eyes roll. Thank you to Chris. Really great conversation. Definitely reach out to him if you want to find out more about what they're doing. Thank you to our production team. You guys are awesome. You make my life so easy. All I do is show up and just talk. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and commented. Really appreciate the support. As always, to those of you in the US, have a fantastic Thanksgiving. And don't forget to sign up for TPM and use the code EJTPM25 to get 25% off a pass. Hopefully we'll see you in Long Beach in a couple months or a few months. Not so soon, like 3.5 months. Don't rush me. In any case, have a great rest of your day and a great weekend and a great Thanksgiving. Bye all. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.